The church bells had just ceased. Drizzle swept across the stained glass, leaving thin silver streaks. Amid dark wood and the smell of candles, Margot folded her hands in prayer and then looked over the room as if commanding, "This family will divide the estate later." I stood mixed among the pews, silent, saying not a word. Suddenly Attorney Riley stood up, and Seamus, the family butler, set on the table a silver USB engraved with the two letters NW. He spoke softly. "Play." The screen flickered black for a beat and then lit up. Ned, in a gray sweater, looking straight into the lens. I, Edward Whitmore, decide to transfer the majority of the estate to Cassandra. She has used all her affection and sincerity to care for an old man about to die, like me. I am truly grateful to her. A seal flashed briefly. Margot hissed through her teeth, "Turn it off." But the rain outside the eaves seemed to speak for me. Today, no one can turn off the truth. I am Cassandra. There are farewells that do not only bury the dead, they also try to bury the will. To bury the name of a daughter-in-law not properly Boston. I have been called a fortune hunter, an interloper into the family line. But that night, right at the altar table, a signed video opened the window again, not to flaunt money, but to keep a person's last word. I trembled but stood still, because I knew the only thing I had was the truth I had lived. Welcome to Revenge and Resolve, where we heal by calling things by their right names and reclaim justice with what has been recorded, has been remembered. If you want to go with me to the moment the envelope is opened, stay until the end. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the twist. Press like if you believe a last wish deserves to be heard in full, and comment play to say that you are here. Thank you for lending me your heart and your eyes from the very first minute. 3 months before the funeral, Boston was still damp with mist and the brick steps in Back Bay still held the salt of the night rain. I pushed Mr. Ned's wheelchair out to the back garden of the brownstone, the wheels crunching on the small gravel, the smell of clam chowder I had reheated from the kitchen drifting out, warm and rich, like a gentle reassurance. A radio set on the windowsill was playing the Sox game. The familiar commentator's voice mingled with the sound of the MBTA passing by out on the street. Bell clanging, steel wheels squealing lightly and then fading. Seamus, the butler, sat on the porch, head bent polishing the silver flatware until each fork reflected the gray sky. From time to time he looked up to ask me, "Cassandra, has the old gentleman finished his noon medicine?" I nodded. Pointing to the medication schedule and blood sugar log Mr. Ned had written out himself in blue pen and taped to the refrigerator door. Neat little boxes, handwriting slightly shaky but steady, like a man wanting to walk the rest of the way by himself in order. In the morning, I got up earlier than the sun, made him a small Dunkin' cup with no sugar, and kept for myself a to-go plastic cup beaded with droplets. The chill from the cup's rim made my hand alert. I checked his oxygen, listened to the machine beep steadily like slow steps, then helped him into thin wool socks, adjusted the blanket covering the pillow, propped him upright to sip the first spoon of chowder. On some days, he joked, "Is the secret seasoning love or salt?" I answered, "Patience," and the two of us laughed. On the windshield of the car parked in front of the house, a resident Beacon Hill Pass flashed a golden corner, a small sign that this place was home, not just an address. Jamie came home early on days when the sky cleared, placed a kiss on my forehead and then on his father's, said he loved us and was grateful. But when it came to decisions, he seemed to lose his footing. "Let Mom discuss it more, Cass. Boston has Boston's way." I didn't cry out, only reminded him to silence his phone when the old man napped. Sometimes he sat beside us, talking about a case, his hand holding mine under the table. Sometimes he left because, "There's a meeting with the firm." and I learned not to expect answers in the tired afternoon. Margot dropped by with the ladies of Beacon, a pearl collar gleaming just enough, perfume faint like a mist on skin. She made a round to look at the herb pots I had planted, glanced at the pair of shoes I set neatly by the back door, and smiled properly. In their eyes, I caught a very polite scrutiny. This girl is not pure Boston Brahmin. I did not fit them because I came to this city on working feet, with a camera and a direct way of speaking. I also did not try to please anyone when carrying a bowl of soup to him, when noting every meal, every nap, every small habit like his liking to hear the socks at volume 6 rather than 7. Seamus quietly slid toward me the pillbox sorted by day, his Irish lilt soft as beer foam. You're doing well. Sometimes, family is the ones who actually stay through dawn. Boston likes to say, family is legacy. Clan, reputation, portraits hung down the corridor. I understand and still believe family is care. The one who gets up before dawn to fix the pillow. The one who counts each spoon of soup so he doesn't choke. The one who sets the radio closer when he says, "Let me hear the socks a bit." On noon days when the sky lifted, the MBTA slid by leaving a low hum, and he and I went slowly around the flower bed, he telling stories of youth in the North End. I laughed and jotted a few lines in a small notebook. Once he asked how to use the phone to film with less shake. I opened the camera app, propped a pillow as a tripod, and he looked straight into the lens, gray eyes gentle like the sky before rain. At that time, I only thought he wanted to send a word to the grandkids. I did not yet understand he was preparing for a day when others would try to rewrite his story. In the afternoon, I parked in Beacon Hill, the resident pass glinting under the sun, carried in a market bag with celery, heavy cream, a little sourdough. I passed stone steps where people hung wreaths, past window panes whose faux candles were always lit as if never turning the day off. I had learned to stand steady in Boston's dense politeness, grateful to Seamus for the water reminder, smiling just enough at the ladies of Beacon, saying no clearly when someone wanted to move his mealtime for a family photo shoot, waiting for Jamie to say what he kept avoiding, and accepting when he could not yet. I am not pure Brahmin, but I know how to measure a bowl of soup, how to wipe the radio's edge, know the tremble in the letter G in the line Mr. Ned wrote himself glucose, okay. In this city, people call legacy the bronze statue standing forever in the rain. For me, legacy is an old man sitting in the back garden, finishing a warm bowl of chowder, listening to the Sox to the last inning, and knowing there is a daughter-in-law who will push his wheelchair slowly past the flower bed, where people do not ask me who I am by their surname, only ask, "Are you all right, Ned?" I answered for him, many times, with a soft and true all right. And it was precisely such days that led me to the evening in the stone church, where a sentence recorded from an ordinary morning kept a place for me among the cold looks. In my heart, I repeated the words I have always believed. Family, first of all, is how we care for one another to live rightly. That morning, I was tidying the desk in the study when the FedEx courier knocked, setting down a thick envelope clearly stamped Riley Law. I had just turned to grab a pen when Margot appeared like a breeze scented with perfume, smiling politely. "Oh, a misdelivered letter." Then lightly tilted her hand to scoop the envelope off my desk as if clearing away an extra fallen petal. The click of her heels faded along the dark wooden hallway, leaving on my desktop a cold water ring from a Dunkin' cup. I opened the tracking app, saved the receipt time, 10:14 a.m. As afternoon fell, the house was as still as a church. I heard a very soft rolling sound downstairs, Seamus pacing back and forth, restless. By midnight, in the absolute hush of Beacon Hill, iron wheels scraped a short line across the brick, The family safe was being pushed out of the study. I stood behind the door, counting my breaths, counting the whispers that slipped out. Get it over to the Cape before dawn. The next morning, where the old wall had been, only a bright dust mark remained in the shape of the missing safe. Jamie got home late, tie loosened, eyes avoiding mine. He sat on the edge of a chair, his mother standing behind him like a statue, her hand resting lightly on the chair back. The 1997 will is very clear, son. I heard the word clear drop like a stone. Jamie nodded. Mom says let her handle the paperwork, then veered off to the weather. On my phone, a strange email pinged from the family office. For convenience, the trust will be placed under temporary administration by Mrs. Whitmore until... Attached with nothing but a very polite thank you. I printed it, underlined temporary administration with a highlighter, and stuck it beside the FedEx tracking screenshot. A misdelivered letter. A safe that vanished. A temporarily administered trust. In Boston, irregularities always look very polite, until you line up the timestamps. Seamus met me at the back porch where the morning sun clung to the doorframe like a light hand. He spoke softly, Irish voice gentle but rough. Mrs. Whitmore told me to take the safe to the Cape, but the old gentleman instructed the second key goes to you. I looked up. Second key? Seamus nodded, pulling from the pocket of an old suit jacket an antique key, dark, cold in my palm like a metallic note. The old gentleman said Cassie will need it at the right time, he added, eyes steady, as if shouldering part of the house's weight for me. I gripped the key, thanked him with a nod deeper than words. In my head, the timestamps arranged themselves. 10:14 FedEx, 11:58 p.m. Safe Wheels, 7:02 a.m. Temporary administration email. When everything tries to call itself by gentle words, only time agrees to tell the truth. At noon, Margot came with two ladies of Beacon friends, smiling lightly and complimenting the herb pots I'd planted. I poured tea, keeping my hands from shaking. We're having guests tonight. Cassie, please tidy up Ned's papers, she said, her eyes flicking across the bookshelf, which now had a gap exactly the size of the safe. Yes, I replied. I'll tidy up, and I'll follow up with Attorney Riley about yesterday morning's envelope. Her face blurred for 1/100th of a second. Then returned, flawless. Oh, the attorney has already sent the necessary copy to the family office. I smiled thinly. Then I'll ask Riley directly. Boston's politeness is like steel wrapped in velvet. I'm learning to touch it without bleeding, leaving only a readable dent. In the afternoon, I sat alone in the study, facing the blank wall. The far-off clanging of the MBTA was like a reminder. Living here means getting used to metal striking metal and still keeping your own voice. I opened my notebook, wrote each timestamp, pasted each piece of evidence, placed a question mark at 1997 will, which I had not yet been allowed to see. Jamie texted a short, "Don't worry," and I replied, "Come home for dinner," meaning I still kept the door open, but would not let it slide. I set the antique key in my palm, closed my eyes for a beat. It was heavy like a charge entrusted. That night, before drawing the curtains, I held the key up to the last scrap of sunlight on the sill and saw it catch a faint streak like moonlight. I understood. What gets wheeled out of a house will have to return by the voice and by paper. And the key Seamus handed me opens not only a lock, it opens a different way of living. I will be calm, I will remember, and I will knock on the right doors, to see whether, in the end, the stone church can still ring out a true sentence amid all the ceremony. A Boston afternoon is gray like a damp cloth. I stand alone in the study, the old key from Seamus lying snug in my palm. The sailboat painting on the wall has turned the color of honey. I trace the edge of the frame, touch the slightly raised wooden ridge that Mr. Ned once said, "This is where the tide turns." The frame clicks lightly. Behind the false wall is a small brick recess, the scent of years-old paper dust and candle wax drifting out. I switch on the desk lamp, take a deep breath, then slide the key into the lock. A dry click. The lid opens. Inside, lying neatly, is a silver USB engraved NW, identical to the one I saw at the funeral, and next to it, a craft envelope containing a scan of the will. I pull on cotton gloves, set everything on a white cloth, photograph each step with my phone, both to remember and to keep myself calm. I plug the USB into the computer. The screen goes black for a second, and then Mr. Ned's face appears. Bright and clear like the morning we practiced filming on the windowsill. He wears a gray sweater. Behind him, a window opens onto the rose garden. I, Edward Whitmore, his voice calm, transfer the majority of my assets to Cassandra because she is the one who cared for me to live truly. He pauses half a beat, looks straight into the lens, as if he doesn't want me to miss a single breath. At the end of the clip, the embossed seal of Massachusetts appears clearly beside the printed name of a notary, Patricia Delgado. I scrub forward to the later section. The frame splits in two. On one side, Mrs. Delgado confirms over a video call. On the other, a date and time panel showing exactly when we filmed. She reads my name, his name, then presses the Commonwealth's raised seal onto the affidavit. The stamping sound lands with a thunk on the paper, like someone bolting a door. Next is the scene of Nurse Alana, the one who usually changed his dressings, signing as witness. I witnessed Mr. Edward lucid, voluntary. Alana reads clearly, the slanted signature familiar like the handwriting on the pill boxes Mr. Ned used to hand me. I sit for a long time, letting my heart catch up with my eyes. Then I open the craft envelope. The scanned will printed on paper with the clinic's logo, a barcode in the top right corner. Dr. Shaw's handwritten signature on the health status certification page, and the line, intended beneficiary, Cassandra, Cassie Whitmore, written clearly. The surrogacy trust section marked N.A., not applicable. I flip to the back, the list of assets. Back Bay Beacon Hill Townhouse, shares in the Port Transport Company, and the Edward and Lillian Whitmore Scholarship Fund. Left to me with the requirement, maintain the scholarship for the children of dock workers. In the corner of the last page, the short recording caption comes up again. Mr. Ned says, half joking, half earnest, "It's the daughter-in-law who cared for me, not the Galas." I laugh, and my throat stings. I jot down a quick timeline in pencil in my notebook. Record, date, month, FedEx, receipt time 10:14. Misdelivered off the desk. Appears in wall recess. Opened at 16:37 with photos. I compare each timestamp with the delivery log Riley sent. Screenshot the tracking. Save the file in 2 different drives. No ornate words needed. The chain of custody is present. The embossed seal is present. The witnesses are present. The Commonwealth has seals that do not lie. I call Riley, leave a voicemail. I have found the NW USB and the stamped scan. I will bring them over tomorrow morning. Please confirm chain of custody. The reply text arrives immediately. Received. Keep in original condition. Bring all step-by-step photos. Outside the window, the MBTA clangs as usual, but my heart is calm in a different way. I wrap the USB and the scan in a new envelope, seal it with paper tape, sign across the seam. Seamus taps softly at the door. I crack it open to let him in. He looks at the USB, smiles with half a mouth. The old gentleman didn't want anyone to lose the thread of his story. I nod. Ask him to witness and take one more time-stamped photo. Then I close the wall recess, hang the sailboat back in its place, returning everything to the composure of a Boston room. Dark wood, family photos, a quiet radio. Night falls. I play the last part once more, like reading a blessing. Beacon Hill, port shares, scholarship fund for Cassie, he says, his voice not trembling at all. I place my hand over my heart, whisper thanks. Not for the money, but for a person who chose to bind the truth to images, seals, and the names of those who cared for him. Tomorrow I will bring everything to Riley, so the papers stand on the right desk. I turn off the lights, leaving only a small dot of light on the table, where the silver USB engraved NW reflects a fine streak, like a tiny boat seeking shore. And I know, with a gentle certainty, when they try to bury a will, I will dig with love and with the history already recorded, matching down to the minute. The day Ned died, Boston suddenly dropped 2 degrees, as if the drizzle had drawn all the warmth out of the dark wood and the stone steps. The phone buzzed in one long ring, the chat, family funeral arrangements, flashed up, and then vanished in an instant. When I opened my phone, I saw my name had already been struck out. No explanation, no sorry for, only a white space cold as mist clinging to glass. I stood in the carriage house, the little house at the end of the garden where every morning I made chowder and logged his blood sugar, listening to the MBTA clanging in the distance like a habit with nowhere left to hold on. At noon, a white envelope slid under the door. Request to vacate, to leave within 14 days. I set the envelope on the table and saw my palm sweat printed on the paper. Margot called Jamie right there in the upstairs living room, her voice precise as if reciting a rite. Let me handle it. Jamie repeated it like a thin raincoat. Let Mom handle it. I looked at him, at the man who once kissed me under the lights on Charles Street, who once fretted over whether to plant basil or mint, and I saw him standing somewhere between 2 shadows. Not my husband, not quite his mother's son. Just a gray patch slipping out of sight. When the funeral date was set, the chat buzzed with messages I could no longer see. Visitation schedule, flowers, black attire, the choir. All of it passed by like a train I wasn't allowed to board. Seamus messaged me privately. I'll bring you the seating chart. Then added a short line, keep steady, Miss Cassie. In the afternoon, I tidied the cupboards as I always did, stacked the Dunkin' cups with faint lipstick marks into a box, wrapped a few Polaroids of Ned smiling while listening to the socks into a separate envelope, taped it with a label that read, Keep. The wooden floor murmured under my feet like a complaint. Each step was a draft at my collar. As I was unhooking the last hanger, the door cracked open and Jamie stepped in. I said very softly, Look at me. He looked over my shoulder, stopped at the rain-dimmed window frame, then dodged. Don't make a big scene during a funeral. I felt the words big scene hit my stomach like a flat stone, sinking without a ripple. Big scene, I repeated to myself, is a person who has just left and a last wish being shoved into a wall recess. At night, the rain tapped the thin tin roof, persistent and fine. I turned on the desk lamp, set the request to vacate beside the evidence timeline, NWUSB, the Massachusetts embossed seal, the notary's signature, Nurse Alana's signature, each one a tiny warmth I gathered to keep myself from shaking. I wrote in my notebook, Day 1, struck from the group, received demand to vacate in 14 days. Day 2, Jamie chooses silence. I didn't curse and I didn't cry for long. I brewed a pot of tea, blew on it 3 times to cool, took a sip and remembered what Ned had told me. In Boston, just go slow, read aloud, don't apologize for telling the truth. I set my hand on the worn wooden table, feeling as if touching a map of paths I had walked. The early mornings rolling the wheelchair into the garden, the times I set the radio to volume 6, the first bowl of chowder of the day, the handwritten blood sugar chart. Shaky, but gentle. All those small things have no line in a funeral program, but they're the only things keeping me upright in a room that has just turned me into a guest. On the third day, people from the family office came to inventory the belongings in the main house, as polite as afternoon tea. "We're just conducting a temporary review." I stood on the porch, keeping the proper distance, noticing their small suitcase with a document compartment just big enough to hold a will. Seamus passed by, set his hand on the banister. "You keep the key, don't forget." I nodded, my hand gripping the old key until it hurt. That evening, I called Jamie again. "Can we talk like two people who both cared for someone about to leave?" The line went quiet, and then, "Let Mom handle it," returned, thin and cold as night rain. I understood. Some people choose to stay inside the warm house, leaving others to stand in the wind. Death doesn't just take the person you love, it exposes the nature of those who remain, who opens doors, who locks them, who quietly moves a safe at midnight and calls it arrangements, who uses the two words temporary to push someone out of the house they kept watch over for so many mornings. I lost Ned, lost the house, nearly lost my husband, and felt as if I had lost my voice. But on the table, between the vacate notice and the photo box, the silver USB still lay there like a thin current of light. I turned off the lamp, cracked the window to let the sound of the rain in, then told myself, their silence is not my definition. If they call this "don't make a big scene," I will do the only thing I know. Go slow, keep records, bring the truth into the light, so that one morning in the stone church on Beacon Hill, people will have to hear a sentence in full. And if I must leave the carriage house in 14 days, I will still carry what no one can take, my name standing in the will, and the way I stayed through the dawn. The small cafe in the South End smells of espresso and old wood, the brick walls still holding the damp from the night rain. I choose a table by the door, my hands wrapped around a latte to stay calm. Riley arrives on time, dark coat, the footsteps of a man more used to walking down dim wooden hallways than bright-lit stages. He takes off his hat, looks at me closely as one looks into a pool. If still enough, you can see the bottom. "Ned anticipated this," he says without preamble, his voice low. He said, "If Margot wants to bury the will, keep a copy that only God and justice can switch off. Have you found the USB?" I nod, recounting step by step. The old key from Seamus, the wall cavity behind the boat painting, the silver USB engraved NW, the scan with the Massachusetts embossed seal, the notary's signature over video, Nurse Alana signing as witness. Riley doesn't interrupt, he only notes the times as I say them, like driving small nails into the frame of the truth. When I stop, he takes a sip of black, then sets the cup down very softly. "If we have to read the will, I will read it before God." He lifts his eyes to the window frame where the South End is brightening. "In Boston, there are doors that only open when you knock in the right place." Seamus met me in the alley behind Back Bay, the sky turning overcast, sea wind drifting from far away. He spoke softly, the Irish lilt of secrets that still know how to soothe the listener. Mrs. Whitmore had the paper copy moved into the safe at the Cape. The car left at 3:15 in the morning. The driver's name is Howard. He thought I was asleep. But in this house, no one sleeps when the safe is moving. He handed me a small slip of paper, carefully written with the license plate, the moment the back door opened, and a short line. "The old man told me, if necessary, tell it exactly like that." I thanked him, placed my hand on his shoulder, felt the tremor only at his fingertips. "You are the one he chose," Seamus said, then looked straight at me. "Don't let anyone say otherwise." In the afternoon, I returned to the cafe with Riley. He had prepared a slim folder, not thick enough to intimidate, just heavy enough to stand upright on the table, a summary of the timeline, a copy of the FedEx email showing 10:14 a.m., a photo of the wall cavity at 1637, Seamus's notes about the pre-dawn drive, and the provisional chain of custody confirmation letter on which I had signed across the seal. "We don't need noise," Riley said. "We need coherence." He proposed something that sounded like a challenge but was really a way to put the truth in its place. "On the day we read the will, I'll ask the parish to turn on the screen, plug in the USB, and publish the sealed copy before the altar. If they want to bury it, we'll dig it up right at the altar." I swallowed, unconsciously tightened my grip on the cup handle. Not because I wanted to beat anyone, but because the loneliness of the days I'd been crossed out suddenly had somewhere to moor. On the way home, the MBTA scraped a streak of sound across the city, and I thought of Ned. He would like the idea of reading it aloud before God. It's like how he always listened to the Sox at volume level 6, clear enough that everyone in the room knew which inning the game was in. I opened my phone. Seamus sent another blurry photo of the van on the slope behind the house, the timestamp matching the slip he'd given me. I saved it, filed it under Cape Safe. Riley texted, "Tomorrow 7:45, the church opens. I've spoken with Father O'Malley." I stood on the brick steps, Boston drizzle dusting my hair in a thin layer like road dust. No drums, no horns, only the steady breathing of people who choose light over loudness. At night, I laid the papers out on the table. The NWUSB, the scan with the embossed seal, the timeline sheet, Seamus's notes, the confirmation text from the parish. I practiced saying a single sentence, slow and clear. "This is the will of Mr. Edward Whitmore, attested by a notary and witnesses, chain of custody intact." Then I closed my eyes and heard Ned's laugh in the clip again. My daughter-in-law cared for me, not those galas. That laugh didn't mock anyone. It was how an old man chose to stand with the person who got up early to warm chowder, turn on the radio, straighten the blanket, and keep him living true. Morning will come, and we will step across the wet stone of Beacon Hill without swords or spears, carrying only a silver USB and a folder just heavy enough for justice to recognize. I no longer tremble like at the beginning, because when old Boston hands stand with you, a lawyer who knows the way, a houseman who keeps his word, the wheels of justice begin to turn. And if they want to bury the will, we will dig it up right there in the church. I moved into a small room in Jamaica Plain, the window looking out at a row of maple trees casting shadows on the surface of an old wooden table. The first thing I hung was a photo of Mr. Ned smiling beside a bowl of chowder, the corner of the picture slightly burned by the afternoon sun. Every morning when the sunlight touches the frame, I give a slight nod as if greeting a relative who is still somewhere in the day. JP is quieter than Beacon Hill, fewer cars. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery at the top of the street enters the kitchen before I do. I take the early shift, 4:30, dip a brush to glaze butter over the croissants. The oven goes ting steadily. My hands grow familiar again with the rhythm of folding wrapping paper. After the shift, I pour a black coffee, buy a bouquet of white flowers with my own money, write a small card, "For Edward, thank you for teaching me slow," and ask someone to send it to the church on the day of the funeral. Not for anyone to see, but so my heart knows it has said goodbye in its own way. At noon, I open my laptop, mark the page, Probate, Massachusetts, with a yellow highlighter as if I can still smell the ink. I'm not studying to argue wins and losses. I'm studying to call everything by its right name. Will, sealed, right to read, chain of custody. I write in my notebook, questions needed, most recent will, witnesses, notarization date, last delivery. I number each line, clip blue sticky notes for the evidence section, yellow for timeline. Riley texts a time to meet a notary near Hyde Square. I bring the silver USB engraved NW, the envelope containing the scan, and a short list of things I don't understand but need to ask. The notary, a curly-haired girl, flips a thick ledger, writes my name, checks my ID, then teaches me how to seal memory, take photos, note the time, sign across the edge of the seal. In court, memories won't save you. Records will, she says, her voice as calm as water, pressing the stamp onto the paper with a thunk that makes me feel at ease. In the afternoon, I walk to the old hospital, stop by the records office, request the in-and-out log for his room during the last 3 months. The clerk squints carefully. Need authorization, and I hand over the letter Riley prepared right away. When I receive the stack with timestamps, who went in, who went out, when the bandages were changed, I feel my throat cool. Those tiny numbers know how to tell a story that doesn't wobble. I drop by the JP Public Library, print the FedEx tracking of the Riley Law envelope showing 10:14 a.m., and print the email header of the temporary management of the trust, the line sent at source 7002, lying right beneath the family office name. Back home, I paste them onto cardstock, mark Exhibit ABC in pencil, as gently as setting down a teacup. At night, I stand before the mirror in the small bathroom, the yellow light a little warm, practicing the short lines Riley gave. This is the original I found. I opened the cavity myself, photographed each step. This is the embossed seal of Massachusetts. This is the witness's signature. I speak slowly, look into my own eyes, sometimes smile when I stumble, then say it again. No indignation, no trembling, just a rounded voice. Between rounds, I turn on the hair dryer to warm the room, listening to the wind like a refrain ironing flat the wrinkled corners inside. Seamus video calls from the old kitchen in Back Bay, raises a teacup in a toast. Keep the fire, Miss Cassie. I lift my own cup, inhale. Peppermint tea, lightly sweet. A week passes like that. Morning flour and hot butter. Noon probate law under slanting sun. Afternoon hospital records. Evening practicing in front of the mirror. I learn to package a day the way you package an order. Check, seal, label, timestamp. On tired nights, I open the NW USB just to hear a single sentence. My daughter-in-law cared for me, not the galas. That line helps me remember. Recovery is not forgetting. It is remembering precisely. I arrange a small box called Heart. Inside are Ned's photo, the white flower card, and the words I wrote for myself, slow and clear. And on the table is the head, notary book, FedEx tracking, email header, hospital log. When I turn off the light, the streetlight spills through the blinds, drawing long stripes on the wall like measuring sticks. I understand. I'm remeasuring this life with carefulness by keeping my name standing next to the truth. And each morning, when I open the door to go to work early, I lightly touch his frame and say very softly, I'm continuing, Ned. Slow, clear, and right. The stone church on Beacon Hill that day was dim like a hastily developed film photograph. Candles trembling, dark wood soaked with the smell of rain, an old ceiling fan turning slowly like the breathing of a city accustomed to hiding its emotions behind ritual. I sat in the middle pews, my hand touching the edge of the mourning cloth, reminding myself to inhale for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts to keep my voice. Margot stepped to the lectern, her pearl necklace cold and glossy under the lights, and opened the eulogy with a line learned by heart. He loved tradition. The words fell onto the stone floor like a cufflink. Sleek, proper, enough to make the whole room nod. But I knew the man lying in that wooden coffin loved something else too, the thing that kept him clear-headed on the afternoons when I warmed chowder and set the radio to volume 6. When Margot folded the paper, Attorney Riley stood, his voice not loud, only firm. He also loved the truth. I saw a small movement in the last row. Seamus, in a simple black robe, crossed the aisle, placed in Riley's hand a silver USB engraved NW, and stepped back, his pale blue eyes warm like a blessing. The screen had already been set before the altar. Father O'Malley nodded, speaking very softly but carrying far enough. Truth belongs to God. I heard the click of the jack, and then a frame appeared, as clear as the morning we practiced filming at the Rose Garden window. Ned, in a gray sweater, eyes looking straight into the lens. He set no background music, didn't need it. "I, Edward Whitmore," he said, pausing exactly 1 beat between the words, "leave the greater part of my estate to Cassandra, because she cared for me, something tradition never taught, but conscience did." I saw the shoulders in front of me jolt, and I loosened the hand gripping the wooden pew. In the corner of the screen, the Commonwealth's raised seal appeared, round and heavy. The notary's voice sounded in the next recorded segment, "Patricia Delgado, number MA, GIF." She read our names, confirmed competence, then affixed the seal. Thump. A dry, neat sound, like bolting a door so the wind wouldn't split the room wide open. The frame shifted to Nurse Alana standing by the head of the bed, signing as witness, reading out full names and dates. Seamus bowed his head, his hands laced as if praying for the simplest thing: do not let anyone alter a person's last words. Margot lunged toward the mic, her voice pitched high. "This is fake." A few phones lifted, a few polite shh cut across the chaos about to break. Riley didn't argue. He only lifted his eyes to the last row where a curly-haired woman stood, dark coat, notary ledger in hand. "Patricia Delgado, notary, Ta, M.A." She introduced herself, set the ledger on the front table, opened to the page with the signature and seal number for everyone to see. This video was notarized by me via a recorded call. Witness Nurse Alana was present in the room. The seal and the record are in this ledger. The old wooden fan kept turning, humming lightly like an old soundtrack. Boston, a city loud in taverns and discreet in churches, suddenly fell silent. So silent I could hear my own heartbeat change when Father O'Malley laid a light hand on the table's edge, looked over the pews and said in a voice just enough, "Who denies the truth is denying the departed." I didn't stand and didn't need to. I only straightened a little, letting the back of the pew take some of the weight of the months of being crossed out, temporarily managed, ordered to leave within 14 days. On the screen, Ned ended with a thin smile. "Cassandra will know how to keep what must be kept, slow, clear, and right." That line was not the transfer of power. It was the assignment of a task. Riley asked permission to show one more single slide. A photo of the raised seal, the FedEx delivery timeline 10/14, the photo of the wall cavity opened 1637, and the signatures of the notary and of Alana. He added not a word. Only let the numbers stand beside each other like lampposts along Charles Street in drizzle. Margot stepped back half a step, lips pressed into a line. Jamie sat stunned, his eyes drifting past me and snagging on the statue of a saint by the window. I suddenly wanted to turn to him and say something very small. You may not choose me, but don't choose against the truth. I didn't say it. I kept it in my chest, like a slip of paper not yet time to hand over. When the screen went dark, the candles still burned, the fan still turned, and people began to rise very slowly, as if afraid of spilling something that had just been set upright. Father O'Malley nodded to Riley, then to me, a nod promising nothing but fairness. Seamus passed by and lightly touched my arm, a small, warm gesture. I heard Boston return, heels on stone, the rustle of raincoats, a wooden door creaking. But somewhere in all that sound, there was a quiet enough for me to see clearly. Today, no one buried the will. And what kept it alive was not my crying, but a video filmed on an ordinary morning, a notary's seal, and a simple sentence. Tradition may forget to teach, but conscience remembers. The oak in the courtroom of the probate and family court in Suffolk shone like a lake on a windless day. The coat of arms hanging high made me unconsciously sit up straighter. I set my folder on the table. A silver USB engraved NW, the scan with the Massachusetts raised seal, the FedEx tracking printed with the time 10:14 a.m., the photo of the wall cavity opened at 1637, Seamus's handwritten statement about the safe being taken to the Cape at 3:15, and Nurse Alana's letter of attestation. When the clerk read the names, my heart beat slow and clear, like the distant tapping of a gavel. Riley brushed my elbow. It was the truth's turn to walk on its own legs. He requested to play the video will with the notary log. On the screen, Ned looked straight into the lens. The familiar words sounded. Then, Patricia Delgado's record appeared. Notary number, date and time, signature, seal. The log matches the seal, Riley said calmly, and witness Alana confirms capacity. Alana stepped to the stand, hand on the Bible, voice even. I was present when he signed. He knew what he was doing. Seamus followed, his pale blue eyes not avoiding. I saw the safe moved at dawn on Mrs. Whitmore's order. Mr. Ned had told me, the second key for Cassie. When the time is right, she'll need it. Margot's attorney rose, his pressed robe like a shield. The court must consider the 1997 will, the long-standing intent of the family. Riley didn't raise his voice. He merely opened to the revocation clause in the video and the scan. Mr. Edward declares the complete revocation of all prior wills, replaced by this one. He submitted an additional printout where the word revoked was underlined, next to the dates of notarization and witnessing. I sat still, my hands no longer clenched. The months of studying probate in the rented room in Jamaica Plain were suddenly repaid. Not to make me speak more, but to let me know when to keep silent and let the records speak for themselves. Across the aisle, Margot curled her lip, whispered to her attorney, then turned out. That FedEx went astray. The evidence is contaminated. Riley produced the tracking. Signature at 10:14 on the envelope marked Riley Law. A photo of my desk at receipt, and a timeline showing the envelope disappearing from the desk and then appearing in the wall cavity. The chain of custody has been restored minute by minute, he said, as if laying paving stones for the judge to step along. Judge Harrington bent his head to read through once, his hand tapping a pencil in a very small rhythm. He looked up, meeting each person. The court acknowledges the video will as duly authenticated, the notary and witness valid. Acknowledges the appropriate chain of custody. Acknowledges the testimony regarding the safe's removal. He paused a beat, as if to let the room breathe. Then the ruling came, without a drumbeat. The court confirms the new will as the operative instrument. Transfer management of the trust away from Mrs. Margot. Designate Cassandra Whitmore as the primary beneficiary. The scholarship fund is to be maintained according to Mr. Edward Whitmore's intent. Open an independent investigation into the dissipation and interference with documents. I heard each clause drop like a pebble smoothing the surface of water. Not loud, only sure. Across the aisle, Margot sprang up, the layer of Boston politeness cracking down the middle. "You stole my house!" I turned back, my voice not raised at all. I kept his word. The judge did not let the theatrics run on. He struck the gavel 3 short times, as if closing a door that had been left open too long. As the clerk read the transfer procedures, I glanced across the benches. Seamus nodded slightly. Alana squeezed my hand for a second. Riley closed the folder, his face easing as if he had just set a picture frame onto its proper hook. I breathed, the smell of oak deepening, warm like the early morning kitchen where I used to warm chowder. In my head, the words quietly braided into a single line. You cannot warp the will of the dead. When the living still keep logs, keep seals, and dare to stand and swear. I thought of the nights in Jamaica Plain, practicing in the mirror under the yellow light, of the white bouquet sent to the funeral with my early shift wages, of the silver USB lying in the wall cavity behind the sailboat painting. Everything had passed through the right stations. Stepping into the hallway, Boston was still drizzling. Jamie leaned against a column, his eyes not knowing where to land. I paused half a second, enough to say the needed line without reopening the wound. If you can't choose me, at least choose the truth. He nodded very slightly, like someone who has finally caught the beat. I pulled up my scarf, walked down the stone steps, my heart light in a way that didn't demand winning or losing. Justice today didn't applaud. It signed, sealed, and returned my name to its rightful place, in the instructions of a man who lived rightly, and in records that do not know how to lie. 6 months later, Boston softened like a cup of tea, left to sit before being sipped. I stood in front of the new sign hung on the white wall. Ned Whitmore Care Fund, a scholarship fund for family caregivers at Mass General and UMass. Each application is a kitchen smell, a breath from a night shift, a pair of hands awake with the patient. I read slowly the way I used to read logs and seals. Seamus still makes 1 round of the house every morning, the silver gleaming but no longer a point of pride, only the tools of a decent dinner. He receives a new salary, enough that he no longer has to silently make up for things with loyalty. Sometimes we sit in the back bay kitchen, the radio on the socks at volume level 6, staying silent for a long while, and then clinking teacups as a stand-in for the words, "all right." One drizzly afternoon, Jamie knocked on the door. He offered a late apology, his eyes seeming to know he had moved slower than the truth. I didn't tear anything up. I simply set a boundary. Thank you for coming. But in the days ahead, each of us will learn to live responsibly with what we chose. He nodded. I closed the door softly and listened to his shoes on the stone steps like a stitch sewing back a torn piece. That evening, I stopped by the church on Beacon Hill, lit a candle, placed a white flower beneath the sailboat painting, and whispered, "I am still keeping my word, Ned. Best revenge, Nishikam. Living well. In Boston, wealth is not a gleaming silver service. Wealth is having your name called correctly in the will, because of your care." If this story makes you believe a little more in the truth, thank you for being here with Revenge and Resolve. Please like and subscribe so the letters of fairness reach the hands that need them. And comment the number 1 if you also choose to stand with the departed, by keeping their word, living slow, clear, and right.